Hey guys, welcome back to the Anime Collector. Today we're going to be starting a new series of tips where I'm going to be teaching you how to spot a wide variety of different types of bootlegs. So in this series, we're going to be starting at the low end of the spectrum with the sort of stuff that you can spot from a mile away. And we're going to work our way into the realm of one-to-one copies that can be almost impossible to spot even when you're comparing them to the real thing side by side. So whether you've just started collecting or you've been doing this for your entire life, I can personally guarantee that you're going to learn something new from this series because I've basically spent the better part of the last couple of years halting all operations on this channel just so that I could specifically research these trickier bootlegs. And in that time, I've actually developed a new technique for how we can deal with them. Now, the technique itself is incredibly simple to use, but in order for you guys to understand why and how the technique works, it's going to require that you've got a pretty firm understanding of certain aspects within the DVD industry. So in this video, as well as introducing you guys to my general technique, I'm also going to be educating you on how DVDs are manufactured and how they operate. But before we get too far into things, I just want to remind you guys that, like any technique, spotting bootlegs is a skill that you develop over time. And a big part of developing that skill does come from experiencing bootlegs for yourself. So, especially if you're new to collecting, you really shouldn't focus your entire technique around just trying to avoid bootlegs altogether, because in the end, all that's really going to do is limit the potential of your collection and lull you into a false sense of security. What you should be focused on instead is your ability to correctly identify bootlegs when you do get them. And by the end of this series, you should have no trouble whatsoever identifying even the most deceptive bootlegs. And I'm going to give you guys all the ammunition you need so that when you do get a bootleg, you can confidently prove it to the seller and get your money back. So getting started, I feel like it's important that we define what exactly a bootleg is. You might be surprised to learn that the term that we use today originally referred literally to the leg of a boot. You see, bootlegging was a rather obscure term back in the day that referred just simply to the act of carrying something inside the leg of your boot. But during alcohol prohibition, that became a very common method for how they smuggled liquor. So because the term sort of gained its popularity while it was associated with those specific illegal activities, it just kind of took on this whole new persona where people used it not only to refer to the smuggling method, but also to the illegal production of the liquor itself. So over the years, the term has just continued to evolve where nowadays it basically refers to any product that is made, distributed, or sold illegally. Now, as far as it pertains to anime DVDs, other terms that you might hear used to describe bootlegs would be a counterfeit, a fake, a knockoff, a pirated copy, or an unofficial or unlicensed release. Now, even though a lot of people are going to use those terms fairly interchangeably when describing all anime bootlegs, I do want to clarify that some of these terms actually do have more specific meanings than others. To give you an example, pirated copies don't usually go out of their way to mimic the packaging of an official release, whereas that is the exact purpose when you're counterfeiting something. Now, a lot of the items that we're going to be looking at in this series will fall into these categories pretty neatly, but as with anything in life, every once in a while you're going to come across something that just feels like it belongs in a strange gray area between the defined terms. So if you're ever unsure of which term to use, I'm going to recommend that you just go ahead and fall back on the word bootleg, because not only does it sort of encompass all the other more precise terms, but it's also the term most commonly used within the anime community. Now, as far as my technique goes, when I'm looking at a suspected bootleg, there are 4 different areas that I like to analyze when determining whether or not something is real or it's fake. Those 4 areas are packaging, DVD, content, and disc information. Now, in order to showcase what we're looking for in these 4 areas, I'm going to be demonstrating on the legit Region 1 release of Black Cat Volume 1. This is going to represent just a generic anime DVD and is going to give us our baseline for what we might expect to see from an official release. Now, as I said before, we're going to start out with packaging. And the reason why is because it's usually the only thing you're going to have the opportunity to look at before you actually buy the product. So the first thing that I want to draw your attention to here are the company logos for Funimation and Gonzo. And the reason that I draw your attention to those first is because it's the easiest way to weed out the lower tier bootlegs, since, as you're going to see in this series, the vast majority of them aren't going to have any company logos on them at all. And with an official release such as this one, it's very common to see them on the front, the spine, and also on the back, as seen right here. Now the next thing that I want to draw your attention to is the barcode. In North America, we brand the majority of our products with a 12-digit, one-dimensional barcode that's known as the Universal Product Code, or UPC for short. And just like the logos for the companies, this is something that's going to be standard on most official releases. Now, there are some situations where you might obtain an official release that does not have a barcode, but I'm going to go ahead and go over the exceptions to the rules later on in this series. Now, I'd also like to point out that this is specifically labeled as being Region 1, which is the region that we use in the United States and Canada. And although the plastic is white, this is still just a standard 14mm key case designed to hold a single DVD. And as you can see here, there's also an insert, but keep in mind that not every official release is going to have one. Now, once we're done looking at the packaging, the next thing we're going to move on to is the disc itself. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is flip it over and do a color test. This is the quickest way to determine whether or not it's a professional grade DVD or merely a writable DVD like you can get at an office supply store. Because as you can see, a professional grade DVD tends to either be a silver or a golden champagne color, whereas a writable DVD is usually more purple or violet. Now, in order to understand why these look different, you sort of have to understand how a DVD works. DVD stands for Digital Video Disc, or Digital Versatile Disc. And as with any other digital medium, it stores its information as a series of zeros and ones, which are represented by zillions of microscopic pits, which start in the center and radiate outwards towards the edge in a spiral pattern. Now, something that's really important for you guys to understand is that a professional grade DVD like this is not actually burned, alright? These things are pressed. See, when a DVD gets mass produced, it goes through a process known as replication. Basically, they start with the original authored file from the distributor, and they use it to etch the information into a master disk that's made out of glass. This master disk is then used to generate a metal plate known as a stamper. This has the information encoded on it in reverse, so it's represented as bumps instead of pits. This is then installed into a mold that will be used to mass produce the DVDs. Now, optical discs are made out of a very special plastic known as polycarbonate, which is melted down and injected into the mold to create a disc that might look something like this. So in the molding process, the bumps on the metal stamper create the pits on the pressed DVD. Now this means that the information that is stored on all of the mass-produced pressed DVDs is going to be a bit-for-bit carbon copy of the information originally etched into the glass master. Alright? Now, after the information has been pressed into the DVD, the next step in the process is to add the reflective backing. Alright, now the reason that a DVD has this mirror quality to it is that when you put it into your DVD player, the information is read by a laser that's pointed up to the reflective surface. As the laser hits the surface, it bounces back towards an optical receiver. So when the laser hits the area between the pits, which are called lands, it successfully bounces back to the sensor inside the optical receiver. But as the disc spins and the laser hits one of the pits, its path gets redirected and it misses the optical receiver. So this signal coming into the optical receiver is read as a series of zeros and ones, which are then translated into the picture that we see on the screen. Now, the technology behind a burnable DVD works a bit different. Since we don't have access to liquid polycarbonate in our homes, we have to work with a disc that's pre-made. And the reason that they're this purple-violet color is because they use a very special organic dye that crystallizes at a specific rate when it's exposed to the heat of the laser inside of your DVD burner. So essentially, when you burn a DVD, you're actually using the laser to etch the information into the organic dye. Now, that crystallization actually scatters the reflection of the laser in your DVD player, allowing it to therefore miss the optical receiver and allowing the DVD player to differentiate those zeros and ones. And because of the crystallization, you can actually see how much of the disk space has been used, because the burned area will appear to be a slightly different color than the unburned area on the outer edge. Now, to be fair, the vast majority of bootlegs that you're going to run into are not going to be burned, alright? They are going to be pressed. I know it's easy to think, based on the terrible quality of most anime bootlegs, that some guy is literally just burning them all in his garage, but in reality, bootlegging is a pretty massive industry, and just like the legit companies, a lot of them are using facilities that are easily capable of producing 100,000 DVDs a day. Now, in this series, we will cover the topic of burned releases in more detail later on, but for now, what I really want you guys to take away from this is that with pressed DVDs, the information stored on them is a carbon copy of the information etched into the original glass master. Now, switching gears back to Black Cat, after we've done the color test, the next thing we want to do is flip it back over and inspect the label itself. Now, in the replication process, after the aluminum layer has been added for the reflective quality, they'll coat it with a varnish in order to protect the information encoded onto the DVD, and then they'll usually silkscreen the label directly onto the varnish. So in most cases, it's probably going to be pretty smooth to the touch. But as I just mentioned, a lot of the bootleggers are using the exact same sort of facilities as the legit companies are, so they're going to have access to the same sort of printing technology. As you're going to see in this series, there will be situations where we come across the DVD where a label has literally just been glued to the disc, but most of the time what it's going to come down to are the details in the artwork and the vibrance of the colors. Now, I'd also like to point out that just like in the packaging, we have the company logo for Funimation and Gonzo, as well as a little symbol here denoting that this is a Region 1 release. So before we move on, I'd like to flip the disc over one more time and draw your attention to some extra bits of information that are stamped on the back right around the center ring. So here we can see some barcodes as well as some bits of text that will sometimes say the name of the show or the name of the specific volume. This information is put here by the replicating companies for their own internal use, so it's not really going to be that helpful, except that it can be used as a shorthand for determining whether or not a DVD is single or dual layered, because most replicators are going to use one barcode for each layer as a means of cataloging the stampers that were used. So because this DVD has two barcodes, it's a pretty safe bet that this is going to end up being a dual layered disc. Now, moving on to stage 3, this is where we're actually going to be looking at the contents of the disc. Stage 2 is just a visual inspection of the disc itself, but now we're going to be putting it into our DVD player. So the first thing that you're going to see as you load up Black Cat Volume 1 is an FBI warning, followed by the logo animation for Gonzo and Funimation, and then we're going to see an advertisement for Salty Ray before we finally get to the DVD menu. Now, because this is a legitimate DVD, there's really not a whole lot for me to say here other than obviously you should expect it to have pretty decent video and audio quality, but there is something that I want to draw your attention to, and that's that when this disc ends, before it jumps back to the main menu, it's going to display this screen for a good 10 or 20 seconds. Now what this is it's the DVD credits for the people who are involved in the authoring process of the DVD. Most authoring companies will put it here at the end of the DVD, but sometimes they will stick it in the special features instead. Now the reason I draw your attention to this is because this information can be valuable as we move forward into stage 4, which is disc information. Now, disc information is the stage that I added in order to deal with these one-to-one copies. So what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be looking at some of the metadata that's stored on a DVD. Now, there are many different ways and many different programs that you can use to access a disc's information. But for this series, we're going to be using a $30 program called DVD Info Pro because not only is it the best program I've found so far, but it also presents an awful lot of information in a very direct and easy to read format. So to give you a quick demo of how to use it, you literally just insert the DVD into your computer, load up the program, and hit the second icon. That's going to bring up this window here where all the relevant DVD information is located. So let me just give you guys a quick rundown of what all of this means. Up first, we've got the current drive. That has nothing to do with the DVD. That's literally just the optical drive that you're reading from on your computer. So it is worth noting that if you have more than one optical drive, you can switch between them using this drop-down menu. Next up, we've got Disk Regions R1. Since this is the official US release, that's of course what we'd expect to see, that it's Region 1. After that, we've got CSS Protected Yes. CSS is a type of data encryption, and it stands for Content Scramble System. Then we've got CPRM, which stands for Content Protection for Recordable Media, and we see that this DVD does not have that type of encryption. Now, that makes sense because, as the name would suggest, this is for recordable media, as is the media code / manufacturer ID, which is why it says not any pressed DVD, because this is a pressed DVD and not a burned one. After that, we've got UDF format type. UDF stands for Universal Disc Format, and it will likely always say version 1.02 for DVDs and version 2.50 for Blu-rays. Then we've got the UDF volume. That's the name that was given to this disc, which in this case was The Cat Out of the Bag, which was the subtitle that Funimation gave to this volume of the show. Then we have the UDF application ID, which in most cases is going to remain blank. Then we've got the UDF implementation ID, which is linked to the program that was used in order to create the authored file for the DVD. In this case, it's Sonic Scenarist 3.1. After that, we've got the UDF recording date and time, which should be the date that the original authored ISO was generated. Then we have the format capacity, which sort of goes hand in hand with number of layers towards the bottom there, because single layer DVDs can hold 4.7 gigabytes of data, and dual layer DVDs can hold 8.5 gigabytes of data. Now if you round those numbers up, you get 5 and 9, which is why single layer DVDs are commonly called DVD5 and dual layer DVDs are called DVD9. Now, as you can see, the format capacity for Black Hat Volume 1 ended up being larger than 4.7 gigabytes. So in order to fit the extra data, they needed to utilize a dual layer disk, which is why the number of layers is listed as 2. And this, of course, confirms what we had suspected based on the number of barcodes on the back of the disk. Now, the rest of this information isn't currently relevant to the technique, so we're going to go ahead and skip it and conclude our rundown of DVD Info Pro. And I do understand that a lot of this information in particular is quite intimidating at first, but I guarantee that as soon as you guys see this technique in action, all of this stuff is going to start to make sense. And the reason that we go from packaging to DVD to content to disk information is because in most cases, if the item you're looking at actually is a bootleg, you're probably going to be able to determine it long before you even get to stage 4. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up here for now. And I want you guys to remember that even though this has been a very explanation-heavy video, the rest of the series is going to continue to revisit these topics. So even if you didn't catch everything today, just stick with it because you're probably going to at least come away with what's important by the end of the series. And if you've got any questions, you can always feel free to ask me in the comments. So let's go ahead and pop this icon on the shelf, and if you want to check out any of my other tips, go ahead and click on their icon, or you can go into the YouTube cards to access a playlist that will show you every tip in the original order that they were released. Anyway guys, I hope you've enjoyed, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.